Right, so we're going to add some flair. So we've worked on panels, what we do with panels, ideas, lines, but we don't always want the bodice itself to be fitted right that way so you can see it. Maybe we want it a bit longer. If we wanted a bodice that was a bit longer below the waist, it needs to be flared out, because our hips, so think of the skirt, so when we come to do the dress we obviously join the skirt onto it, but at the minute if you're going below the waist, it needs to be wider than this waistline, otherwise it will just roll up and ruck. So that's really important to understand that. So if you wanted it to just be boxy, you can ignore this waist start, and then you can square out from the bust point. So you're going to keep it fitted at the bust, and then I'll draw that in a minute. Okay, so I'll just work on the front bodice for now. So if you wanted it to be boxy, we keep the bust start so it's nice and fitted here. Okay. Lots of different ways of doing stuff. We can say, well, I just want a nice boxy shape, so I'm going to go 90 degrees from the waist here, and then from that, keeping the fitted bust point, square that up, and then obviously that's boxy. We can't go too long because you need to know your hip measurement. If your hip measurement is bigger than your bust measurement, that would need to be flared out a bit more. Alright, so boxing things around, the most easy basic way of making like a blank canvas, as I talk about this as a canvas, is to close the bust dart and open up flare into the hem. So if we take the perpendicular line from the bust dart down, and then if I close this and then open it in here, it will create, like when we've done the A-line skirt, no different. And then we can just slash that up, and then you could make your garment longer because it's dealt with the issue. So if we close the bust dart out and add flare into the hem, that's created effectively like an A-line. So when that's worn, stuck together, and then if this is cut on the fold, if that's your centre front, or it's going to have a button opening or something, so that I wouldn't add flare to particularly, otherwise it would add a bit of a poke, but you could add more flare onto the side with a nice fitted bust if you wanted to make it a little bit more flary, coming out like this. I just show, sticking it in there. So that's the simplest way of adding flare into a bodice, and keeping a nice fit still at the bust, and we can make that a nice long wide A-line-y type. And if it depends on the fabric, depends if how it hangs. If it's rigid fabric, it will stand out. If it's soft viscose or something, it would drape and hang floaty. Then you can continue, and then if you wanted to change the neckline, make something a bit more interesting, you can, consider where you're doing random shapes or something linked to an artist. What would that look like? You could change an armhole shape. Because there's no seams on this, you can just add panels wherever you want them to be. So these can all then just become panels of an interest, let's say. Just something like that, and then add your seam allowances. I can lengthen that because it's flared, so this then would become my garment, my front. You don't always have to be symmetrical depending on your artist, and you can add lines. We could make it dip down at the front maybe. You can see that is curved. Don't straighten it. If you straighten that, it will then dip at the hem, which might be a look you like. But where this point here is, and this point, the original bodice, that will keep it level. It looks like it's going up, but when it's then worn and on the body, it will have the flare down and it squares up and wraps around the body, and you can see how that levels, and it's still fitting around the bust, and that's what creates that nice shape, that little trapeze sort of shape. So what if we wanted to go a little bit more extreme? So that's one idea, and that's just the most basic, adding flare into the hem. What about if we wanted to create more sort of sculptured ideas? Keep it at the waist, but I want to add where I've got some different shapes, draw around my bodice. Alright, so be a bit more wacky with it, a bit more looking at if someone had an artist and it was circles or something, then maybe having a panel that stuck out a little bit or something like that. So always remember to add your straight grain onto it. So I'm just going to say, well, I'm going to keep that princess seam, but I want something sculptural going on this panel. So I'm going to keep this one as a princess seam. So that one's going to stay as it is. I might change the neckline or something, but I'm going to work on this side panel here. And I'm going to decide that I want a strange garment. So I'm going to put a horizontal line, and I want to add flare to one or both of these panels. Different ideas, different looks. So I'll just cut that one out. And just going a little bit more abstract, because a lot of the artists that you're using are abstract. So if I cut along that line, okay, remember notches are important, so it might be a good idea to mark some notches on the two panels before you cut it, just to give you some ideas of sewing it back together. So I could maybe slash this one down and open it up to create some flare in this panel. So just do some sort of 3 equal slash marks, and then I could open that up. Put that one on there. Equal distances. So I've added flare into my lower panel. So doing that could then be, add your seam allowances and everything. Obviously I'm just going to keep it net for this demo. So that makes that flared. Now that's going to sew to the panel above. So I could pleat it onto the panel above, I could gather it onto the panel above, make some interest going on. So obviously this line is bigger, so that's where the notches come in. So in fabric I can either pleat it or gather it. Those could become pleats. Those bits that I added in could become little pleats. And then it sews back on to my lower panel, just so it adds a bit of an accent or something going on, a bit of interest onto the garment. Then that would still have the same fit. But what if I wanted, or I could gather it onto that bit, so it was still, but it would, on that lower panel it would just have some texture, a bit of interest going on, something a bit different. Then you could put some piping in the seam, make it stand out a little bit more. Obviously different colours, layering fabrics. But what if I wanted to be a bit wacky and I want to make this actually stand out a bit conical? So I'm going to, in the same places where I had my lines, these are my slash lines, I'm going to add flare to this one as well. it up. Take that one into the armhole. Right, and then if I open this the same amount, it will become a bit like one of those toilet roll Chinese lanterns that we used to make as children. So it will stand away, it pushes the fabric out. Okay, so open it equally, obviously you'll do much better, more accurate measurements. So it's just coming up with different ideas of how we can change the shape within the bodice to link it to our starting point. Okay, so this, and you can see that's got the curve. So we keep the two curves. They don't look like they're going to match together, but they do. These are the two ways that they do, and then that's going to create a dome coming over the bodice. So when they're then sewn together, obviously you'll add all your seam allowances. Be accurate with your cutting. And again, you can alter shapes around the armhole, make it link. But I just wanted to show you how this, when they're then sewn together, which obviously I'll just sellotape quickly. And they'll be done. And then it's just creating more of a shape, a cone interest. So it will be a bit bulbous, but it will be very abstract. And it's just a way of creating that sculptural three-dimensional shape on the side. Might not be the most flattering. And then when I join that to my princess seam, it just shows the fun you can have with creating panels and adding flair. So when they're joined together, they'll all go together because all the sewing lines were the same, but it's just making a nice, and then when you create it in fabric, there's your bust start there. So we've got that bust shape, but then we've got this random three-dimensional side panel. So it will fit over the bust there, but then it's got this extra bulbous shape going on and it's distorting the fabric. Alright, so I just want you to have some ideas, independent stuff, and play around and experiment with how this garment will fit, because this will sit like this, and then this lays flat against the body and this bit will cone out, and then that will fit over the bust.